Peter and Margie are both in their early 70s and they live on the beach at Aspendale. And they have 3 kids, they have 6 grandkids, 2 families live 300 metres away. They're currently hosting 2 grandkids for homeschool 2 days a week during COVID-19. Peter worked in the mining industry. Margie is an ex-primary teacher. Almost every morning, both swim 3 kilometres at Nunawading Pool, that was pre-COVID, or ride 50 kilometres along Beach Road, or jog 6 kilometres along the foreshore. They try to travel once a year, pre-COVID, and they wander independently and never on a tour. September last year, they wandered alone in a 4-wheel drive camper around Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Botswana, after Peter worked in Botswana for 3 weeks. Privately, they've paid for their 20th primary school to be built in rural Myanmar. Last November, they took their 2 daughters and 4 grandkids to stay in a farmer's houses in some of those villages. They're currently doing pro bono work for several community enterprises, NGOs, as we know. Peter's PowerPoint presentation is a real eye-opener. Welcome, Peter. Please continue.
So we've taken our small backpacks on local transport into the areas you can see there. First, 2010, we went through Syria, Lebanon and Jordan. And then the war started and we still went back to Syria and Iran and Turkey. And then 4 years ago, we went through where the purple is, through Iran, Armenia, Georgia and Turkey. And as Simon said, we don't do group tours. We always wander alone. We look up the books and try and find every tourist attraction. We explore everywhere and we rarely see other Westerners. Now, the talk this morning is about trying to understand all these hot spots in the Middle East. And most of these are religious wars. Probably a lot of you realise it's Sunni Muslims in the grey area there versus the Shia Muslims who predominate in the yellow areas. One exception is last month. You've probably seen on TV, especially if you watch SBS, about the war going on between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, this is actually Muslim versus Christian. On the left is photos taken last week, and on the right, we went up through the edge of that in 2016. There's Margie on a bus, and there we are walking across the border alone at midnight from the bus. Now, Iran versus USA, this is quite pivotal to the whole of the Middle East. In the 19th and 20th century, Iran was badly exploited by Britain and then by USA. And then in the 1970s, the US supported the corrupt Shah of Iran, and the expats from USA had very extravagant lives there, and they became very detested by the locals. So in 1979, the local people had enough of both the Shah and the USA, and I threw them out with the popular uprising led by Ayatollah Khomeini. And then move forward, 2002, remember George Bush proclaimed Iran was on the evil axis of evil. And then last month, Donald Trump said Iran is the greatest terrorist nation on earth. And you'd probably know he's unilaterally trying to crush Iran. And he hasn't got the support of the United Nations. So in 2016, we were there in the axis of evil, and we wanted to get a long distance bus from Tehran across towards Iraq. So we walked with our backpacks across the city, and we found the underground train, went down, and we got on to the train. You can see on the left there, and some of these axis of evil soldiers followed us in, and they sat near us, and they saw we had the instructions of how to get there, which were written in the local Farsi language. And they said, we'll help you, get off here and wait with us. And we thought, oh, what's going on? And they had a bit of broken English, one of them, two of them did. So we sat there thinking, oh, are we in trouble or not? And then they said, come up, and we walked up to the surface, and they said, we'll take your bags, and they've got Margie's, but I was still sceptical, so I would let them carry mine in case I ran off with them. And then we went to the counter to buy the bus tickets, and we just gave them money, and they looked after it all. We didn't know what was really going on. And then they waited around with us really politely until the bus was ready to go. And they refused any offers of soft drink or tea. They simply wanted to look after us, and they made sure we weren't cheated. They made sure we're on the right bus. And counter to what lots of people think, all over Iran, people were just like that. Now, here's a question for you guys. Who am I? I was born in the Middle East. I grew up with Jews all around me. I became a divine messenger. I rebelled against local authorities. I was persecuted for my beliefs. I preached tolerance and high ideals. I'm believed to have said, believe in God, ask for forgiveness of sins, and calendars begin from my time. So you're pretty confident that you know who that is, don't you? Well, my first marriage was very successful. It lasted 25 years and we had 5 kids. After she died, I married another 12 times. You worked him out?
Everybody's muted.
I grew up in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. We lived in tribes, rough, tough life. We worshipped local gods. I was orphaned at 8, and so I had to go to work on caravans across the deserts to Syria. And at 25, I married my employer, and we had a really good marriage, all those kids. But I gained a reputation for being very fair and was asked to adjudicate a lot of disputes amongst the tribes. And then, like the Christian Jesus, at 40, I was visited by Angel Gabriel in a cave. And I told the locals of Mecca they should behave and treat each other far better. I preached there was only one God, the same God as for Jesus and for the Jews. I rebelled against local authority and fled with my friends to Medina. And that's when the Islamic calendar begins. There, I got lots of support and returned to win a battle against the authorities in the very powerful Mecca. Then my warriors conquered all of Arabia. And of course, my code of behavior became Islam, and I am Muhammad. Now, this is the most important slide of the whole morning. The cause of today's wars in the Middle East. Upon my death in 632, my closest supporters immediately held a secret meeting and elected Abu Bakr as my successor. Now, today, 85% of Muslims follow this stream, and that's the Sunni Muslims. But my own family believed I had anointed my cousin Ali to be my successor. And the other 15% of Muslims are Shia, meaning party of Ali. So for the past 1,388 years, the Sunni and the Shia have been fighting each other for who's right. The cause of the wars today, number 2, the Arabs conquered rapidly, but Islam followed slowly. After the Arab warriors conquered and united Saudi Arabia, they spread across Northern Africa, the Middle East, and even into Spain. They wanted good farming lands and material wealth, a bit like the Crusaders. So Islam followed slowly. Arabs didn't force the locals to become Muslims at the point of the sword. In fact, quite the opposite. The Arabs wanted the conquered people to accept subordination, and they had to pay a special tax for being a non-Muslim. So by 750, which is what, about 100 odd years after Muhammad died, all the lands below in the dark grey, the dark brown, were conquered by the Arabs, but only 10% of the Middle East was actually Muslim at that time. And the locals in those areas converted to Islam slowly for all sorts of reasons, including dissatisfaction with the Christian church in Constantinople. When we spoke to, with Chris Rennick's wife, we focused a bit on that. So Islam spread slowly behind the conquering Arabs. Here's another key slide of the cause of the wars today. Islam swapped from being Sunni to Shia. Up until about 1500 AD, so what's that, about 800 years, most of the Middle East was Sunni Islam. So in that map down the bottom right-hand corner, nearly all that was grey, right, all Sunni. And Iran had been ruled by foreign empires for the 850 years since being conquered. But in 1501, Ismail I began to reclaim Iran, a lot of people call it Persia, from the conquering foreigners. Now, Ismail I actually thought he himself was the reincarnation of Jesus and Ali, which is an interesting mix. So he conquered Iran, and then he converted from Sunni to Shia to give his country national identity. And this created the world's first major powerhouse of Sunni influence. So Shia influence, sorry. And then his forces went on to conquer Iran, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Iraq. So they sort of spread Shia into those yellow areas there in the map. The cause of wars number 4. Today, Islam, and most of the countries there you see are Muslim. The Shia countries are islands in a sea of Sunni. And you can see across there on the left-hand side, in Syria and Lebanon, there's Sunni against the fertile coast there. This is mainly desert out here. Most of the people live here, and most of those people are Shia or Alawite, it's the same, similar. So today's hotspots are Sunni Muslims versus Shia Muslims. And these are religious wars. They're not what you hear all the time in the media, that they're civil wars. Now, our credibility, these are the places Margie and I have travelled in our time on Earth. We started off singly, and then our kids, we took them backpacking. And we've done a lot of backpacking, just wandering, and we've hired cars at times and vehicles. Perhaps the best country ever visited amongst all those is Syria, before the fighting, before ISIS did all the damage. It's full of historical sites, deserts and cities. Arab lifestyle is so different to ours. You've got a mixture of Islam and Christianity. Personally in Syria then, we're very, very safe, day and night, can go anywhere very trustworthy, very welcoming. You could leave your money on top of your bed and it would be there in the morning, go out of your room, be there when you came back. And Iran, we've got similar thoughts. And you can see on the left-hand side there, that's my computer. And I work with this little badge we got back in 2011 that I love Syria. So we took our small backpacks on local transport in those places. When we go, there's the backpacks at the station. We take the train up to Flinders Street and get the bus to the airport. That's all we have. We take that, smartphones, and a few US dollars and our credit cards, debit cards. We wander alone. We don't have an itinerary. We have a plan. We set off in the morning and we're not quite sure where we'll end up at that night. We use public transport, occasionally hire a vehicle. And it's all done for the experience, not to save money. In Syria, there we used public transport. And on the top right-hand corner, we're getting into a bus at Raqqa. And a year after that, no, 2 years after that, it became the headquarters for ISIS. We wander a lot. That's the pack we've taken a lot of times. We eat with locals, just in the local food. We find accommodation on arrival. That's up in northern Iran. A couple of times we've stayed with Arab families. The driver said, "Do you mind if we call in just while I see my old friend?" There he is there with his family and one of his 3 wives. And they were so hospitable. We had dinner there. And then they just rolled out the mattresses and we stayed the night. And totally safe. And then a few years after this, that town was overrun by ISIS. So those people may well be dead. And here's just a few photos of our trip through, mainly through Damascus, through Syria. And you can see the maps each time it's got a ring of where it is. So this is Damascus, night time, totally safe in alleys. Irrigation from the Euphrates, which you know about from the Bible. Margie playing with the kids. The man on the left was very keen to show Margie a bull's penis. So that's what he was reaching behind to show her. This is Aleppo. You probably heard about that in the media. The war was totally safe to walk there at night. And all along the coast, there seemed to be support for Assad when we were there. Talking to local people, they liked him. And you see lots of posters. And in Syria then and still now, you can be a Christian or a Jew, whatever you like. You can be a Sunni or a Shia. And you can dress however you like. This is taken in the shops in Aleppo. And see, here's another trip out into the central deserts. There's ancient forts out there and ancient Christian basilicas. Just amazing to see. And then away from the coast, you see it's all a desert. And in the central desert cities and towns, most of the people seem to be Sunnis, and they're probably raised to hate President Assad, who's a Shia Alawite. Here's a shot up in northwest Syria up there. This has become a battle zone. And when we're at this basilica, 6th century basilica, which was absolutely breathtaking, we looked out and there's a shell exploding in the distance. You see the yellow. And in western Syria, where a lot of the fighting has been, the Romans built bridges back there 2,000 years ago. They built this water wheel. The one on the right channels water back 25 kilometres and then irrigates all the countryside down for 25 kilometres from that water wheel. And here's Crap Chevalier. You see where it is on the map. It's supposed to be the finest castle in the world from the Crusades, First Crusade. That's ISIS's contribution to it. Here's the Roman city of Palmyra when we're there, 2011. You can see where it is in the middle in the map there. On the left is the Temple of Bel. That's Margie and I posing out the front. And if you went there now, that's what's left of it on the bottom right. There's the Temple of Bel on the left when we were there, and there's a overhead shot of it if you went there today. There's the Roman Triumphal Arch. That's what it looks like down the bottom right today. UNESCO World Heritage, the markets in Aleppo on the left. And that's what it's like if you went there today. That's obviously from the internet. There's the ISIS smashing any images. And this is Mahmoud, our taxi driver. And he drove us for a couple of days. We hired him. And when we got back to Homs, which is one of the it's a very Sunni city, so it's been a bad battleground. Before this, of course, he had an apartment in that block, and we stayed with him. It was a filthy apartment. We ate on the floor, and we didn't get dysentery or anything. Anyway, that's what his town looks like, his city looks like now. But you see lots of those photos, but we think probably most of Syria is still how it was before. We saw a program on Syria a few weeks ago, the person travelling through, and life in Damascus seemed to be just like it was when we were there. And not sure, but we guess that the parts of Syria that were Shia are probably largely undisturbed, whereas the parts which were rebellious Sunnis have been destroyed. Now, trying to understand the Middle East. First of all, we are not experts, we are just tourists, and some of you might know more about this than us. This is just our opinion, this is our reflections. But we see three underlying forces. First of all, religion, that we just talked about. Second is the ethnic groups. And thirdly, empires and politics. Now, this is our own interpretation. We've never seen it presented like this. And you're free to disagree or agree with parts, but we hope you get a framework to think about things and interpret things in the future. I'd love to come back at the end and talk about that war that now is in Azerbaijan and Armenia, because it fits so well with what we're talking about this morning. So the first framework is religion. The Sunnis versus the Shia, well known. So today there are 2.5 religious powerhouses. The powerhouse for the Sunni is Saudi Arabia, and their half a powerhouse is Turkey. On the other side, it is Iran, the Shia. As you heard, they converted to Shia in 1501 to give themselves identity under Ismail I. So the hotspots are mainly the 85% Sunni versus the 15% Shia. Now, ethnic groups. If you have a look on this map, which is the ethnic groups in the Middle East, you can see there's the green, there's the maroon, a bit more green here, which is important, the yellow and the orange. First group is the Arabs. Second group is the Turks. Third group is Iran, and the fourth group are the Kurds. So let's look at the first lot, the Arabs. They're predominate in Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. So I won't go through all that, but you probably have got a good idea about Arabs historically and today. Except it seems as though they are evolving in the cities to become more open and more tolerant of women. So here's some photos we took of Arabs while we're travelling. They were so friendly and so trustworthy, contrary to what I was told when I was a young person. Bedouin farmers, they're subsidised by the government to live out there. And as we said, unexpectedly, we stayed overnight with Arab families twice. So safe, so friendly, so welcoming. But one of the things that really disturbs us, especially with the world problems with the planet, Arab families typically want 15 to 20 children, and they still seemingly have multiple wives. It's a huge drain on the world. Right, the second ethnic group is the Turks. So here's some photos we took through Turkey. Now the Turks, actually, their origins are in the Central Asia, and you can see there on the top right, and they moved across in the 10th and 11th centuries. They moved down, you can see, through Persia, and they picked up a lot of Persian ways while they were there, and they don't seem to have left that many people behind. And then they moved into Turkey and up into Armenia there. So they are migrating into an area of Turkey, we call Turkey, so they displaced the original indigenous people there. Now, the Turks in 2020, there's about 80 million people in Turkey. 75% of them are ethnic Turks that whose ancestors migrated there from Central Asia. And you may not be aware, but they had triple genocide of minorities in World War I. They massacred millions of Armenians and Greeks and Assyrians, and there's still battles going on between the Greeks and the Turks, you're probably aware of. I just listened to a podcast written in 2016 from an Arab who described the massacre of the Armenians in Turkey by the Turks and by the Kurds. It was bloodthirsty. So they're Sunni, and they're the second Sunni powerhouse. Remember, they became secular under Ataturk, who's the opposing general at Gallipoli, but they're reverting to Islamic State under Erdogan, and they're reverting to Sharia law now. And Turkey is obsessed by the minorities in the south east, and they deny that the Kurds are a separate group, separate ethnic group. Some photos of Turkey there in the eastern Turkey. There's a fantastic Christian, an old city, was called and it was called the City of 1,000 Churches. Yeah. Because they had hundreds of churches just like that one there. Hardly any tourists go there. It is the most magnificent place. It's just riddled with these ancient cathedrals and churches. And that's the countryside, bottom left. And then bottom right, we were in Turkey during Ramadan, so we didn't eat during the daytime, which the locals really appreciated. that we didn't eat. And then, like them, soon as the siren went, we went and ate. And then we were helped by a policeman who's up there on the right. And he took a day off to show us around. And he might be one of the guys that was put into jail by Erdogan because he was too friendly to the infidels. Third ethnic group is the Iranians. You might call them Persians. So they're Persians. Iran means the land of the Aryans. So the Indo-Europeans migrated through Europe, as in that map, and then they migrated into Iran about 800 BC. So many Iranians have similar ancestry to many of us. But for thousands of years, Iran's had waves of invaders, including in recent times, the Arabs in the 7th century. And then in the 12th century, the Turks went through and they settled in northern Iran on their migration to Turkey. And then you've got, in the 6th century, Ismail reclaimed Iran and converted to Shia. And in 1979, there was a revolution to depose the Shah and to get rid of the USA and Britain. So poor old Iran, they've been ruled almost exclusively by oppressive Iranian dynasties and by oppressive foreign powers the whole time. The Iranians always felt completely safe there, ever so welcome, always so friendly. And here we went to a tourist attraction, and before we knew it, we were invited onto the bus with this group of locals that came up from Tehran, and we spent the whole day with them, and they shouted us around. And typical, the women wear the strict Islamic clothing, and the men wear what they like. But we found out from people in Iran that the women hate wearing that clothing, but they have to do it because it's imposed upon them by the regime. And the men, of course, they wear the same clothes as you do in Australia. They're exempt. Yeah, so we got the feeling that women don't wear those clothes because they're respecting their religion and etc. They wear it because they're forced to. And they take it off as soon as they get at home. Just couple of photos, few photos in Iran. Kurds. Now, there is no country for the Kurds. There's and there's 15 million in Iran, Syria, and Iraq. The Kurds, over the millennia, there are lots of different ethnic groups have migrated and settled in that area, Kurds. But generally they're similar to us, Indo-Europeans. And they are adamant they are not Arabs. And the Kurds have the saying, we've got no friends but the mountains, because they've been attacked so many times and they retreat there from marauding armies that rape, murder and pillage. So they're still very tribal, nomadic, brave and tough, but they're desperate for a homeland. And they have complex relationships with all the countries around them. And reputedly, they helped Turkey massacre millions of Armenians in 1916. And there's a photo of Margie in Iran, in the Kurdistan region of Iran. And she's looking across there. Can you see the road sneaking up? You can see the snow in the mountains, and that road goes over the other side to Iraq. The Kurds repeatedly promised homeland, and also they are Sunni. Now, the third framework is empire and politics. Now, this is the second most important slide of the day. When we were in Syria and Aleppo, the war had started. We saw destroyed buildings, we heard, and we weren't allowed to go to certain areas. We saw blood on the road, didn't we? Remember, where people were murdered? This woman in Aleppo said, "We are being invaded. This is not a civil war." And we got this feeling from the people in Syria that the ones against the coast were supporting Assad, and they felt there was an invasion from outside the country. So here's the framework. On the Sunni side, you've got Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and they are being supported by the USA and to a lesser extent, Europe. On the other side, the Shia side, is Iran is a powerhouse, and they're strongly supported by Russia. So we'll go through this. Back in World War I, the Ottoman Empire was disintegrating, and in return for fighting the Ottomans, the Turks, the Arabs and the Kurds were each promised a nationhood by Britain and France after hundreds of years under those empires. So they were, in concept, they were promised lands like the ones I've shown there, the yellow one for the Arabs and the Kurd one in maroon. But secretly, Britain, France and Russia were plotting. And they had their spheres of influence. There's France, Britain and Russia. You can see where they are. And in 1916, you might have heard the Sykes-Picot Agreement between France, Britain and Russia. And they split up the country into nations. And you can see Syria was formed, Iraq was formed, and Jordan was formed. But it was actually an absolute disaster, because what they did was they abandoned the promised nations for the Arabs and the Kurds, and instead they split the Arabs, the Sunnis and Shia into two. So you can see the Sunni Arabs, instead of having a homeland in the centre there, that was split in two, and they were joined with the Shia. And to form, so over on the left, they were joined together to form Syria, and on the right, the Sunni and the Shia were joined together to form Iraq. And the Kurds were completely ignored, and the Arabs didn't get their homeland here in the centre. So today, Saudi Arabia, it's the Sunni powerhouse. We think it's covert and secretive, and we suspect it actually instigated the war in Syria. Its main ally is the USA, and you would have seen gigantic arms purchases by Saudi from the USA. And Iran is Saudi's arch enemy. It's the Shia. Now, our interpretation, Margie and I, interpretations of Saudi is it wants a three. It wants to destroy Shia Islam in Syria, Iraq, Yemen and Gulf states. You know, there's a war going on in Yemen, and that's the Saudi is trying to reclaim the Shia area down in Yemen. The Saudi wants to impose its very strict version of Sunni on the rest of the Middle East, and it wants to take no refugees. Now, I don't know if you follow Saudi in the Middle East at all, you'll know that this guy, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, has positioned himself to become the next leader of the head of the royal family in Saudi. There's a magnificent book written about him called Blood and Oil. his background is like one of these American melodramas. It's just fantastic. You couldn't believe how he got to where he is. He was nothing, and he rose just through his own Machiavellian ways to become poised to become the next leader of the Saudi nation. USA. Now,
Your connection's fading a bit, Peter.
we must say this got a lot of our opinion. Okay.
Yeah, it says it's unstable, but I don't think we can do anything about that.
USA, is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yep, that's better.
Okay. So this is, some of this contains our opinion, and you people might disagree. In our opinion, the USA has been on the wrong side of too many events in the Middle East. The USA and the Shah, who I used to think was a pin-up boy, was a primary cause of the 1979 revolution by Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, Iran is USA's obsession and arch enemy. Is it trying to get even? And when we're in Iran, the people in Iran said, we don't hate Americans as individuals, we hate America. When we went there, we could go anywhere we liked, but if you're an American, you'd have to have a person escorting you.
And more difficult to get into.
Yeah, very hard to get in there. Saudi is USA's biggest ally in the Middle East. And, you know, the expression, judge a person by their friends. But most interestingly, the USA is approaching energy self-sufficiency with this, the fracking down in the gas and oil down in America. And it's no longer depends on Saudi oil. So the balance has changed dramatically. In Syria, many people besides ourselves believe USA was a primary cause of the war in Syria. Throughout, the USA has vehemently supported the Sunni forces against Assad. Now, interestingly, Joe Biden, he supports return to Obama's nuclear agreement, and his people want to ban shale oil. By contrast, Trump is unilaterally putting sanctions on Syria. So our opinion is, throughout Middle East history in the last 200 years, be much better if the USA was never involved. Turkey seems to be assertive, belligerent, confident. It is definitely anti-Shia, and it's supporting the Sunni in Syria. And a couple of months ago, it invaded northwest Syria. It is also obsessed by suppressing Kurd nationalism in its southeast. And as we said, Erdogan is moving Turkey to become strict Islam. Now, Turkey's economy is vulnerable to the USA, but it's totally dependent on Russia for exports and tourists. So Turkey's in an interesting situation. It's fighting Russian allies and supporting America, but it's very dependent on Russia. Kurds, poor things, fighting for nationhood. They've been betrayed many times by Britain, France, Russia, and Turkey, and most recently by the USA. Perhaps with time they'll get autonomous regions. I think nothing more. Russia, Syria. In Syria, Russia is underpinning Assad government, and it helped Syria and Assad withstand the Sunni uprisings and invasions. It has brought stability back to war-torn Syria. It's filling any of the voids left by the USA, and we've seen this written and heard this. the Christians and minorities in Syria are very grateful to Russia for coming in to stabilise the country. Iranian Kurds, they are cooperating with Russia. Turkey, as I said, Russia has overwhelming economic power over Turkey. And if you see Turkey doing things and they make very strong statements, they're going to do things, and then they get told by Putin to back off. Our opinion is, in Australia, Russia is always a baddie. But if we were in Syria, we would, our interpretation, if the people of Beaumaris were living in Syria, you'd be living in the coastal fertile strip and you'd be supporting Assad, generally. Iran, it's the Shia powerhouse. The Shah there, I've read about him. His regime was absolutely corrupt and despotic. So in 1979, they were overthrown with USA, and it brought rule by the Ayatollahs and the Guardian Council, who decide everything in Iran now. We've got Sharia law, Islam there overrides parliament, and they've imposed these strict dress and behaviour codes. Now, as we said, Iran is the arch enemy of USA, Turkey and Saudi, but it's the ally of Russia. Iran has got terrible economic woes at home. The public is totally worn down. Frustrated. They can see all this money being spent on the wars outside Iran. They've got terrible inflation. They're suffering dreadfully by the restrictions, embargoes posed by the USA. So the people in Iran are in a terrible situation. But indirectly, Iran is protecting minorities like Christians in Syria. Now, the final one, Syria. There used to be 21 million people before the war. Now there are 17 million. The majority of people in Syria are Sunni. And as you see in that map again, they're mainly in the desert areas. And the Alawite are in the fertile coastal strip, and they rule the country. And it's a legacy of the French is why they do. If you were in Syria, yeah, as I said before, you'd be living in that fertile strip. You'd be well-off middle-class people, and you'd be generally supporting the war against the Sunni invasion. And you'd be generally supporting Assad. Assad is winning the war now with the support of Russia and the Kurds. And we suspect the people fleeing Syria are mostly Sunni. So that drop in 4 million people, there's a huge number killed, but millions and millions of, we suspect, Sunnis have fled to Turkey and to Europe and to Iraq. But as I said, Saudi Arabia won't take them. We think that if Assad does end up stabilising Syria, it will be a secular state. It will tolerate Shia, Sunni, Christian, Jews, Zoroastrian, Druze. We think you'll be able to choose your own style of clothing, and you can have your own lifestyle, drink alcohol, whatever. But we just pray its world heritage is saved. So there it is, summary. You've got the politics, the religion, and the ethnic groups all together. And that's my final slide. there we are. We arrived in Damascus. The war was going on. We arrived there at midnight. We walked down the main street to the old walled city, down at the end there. And there were the flags flying. On the left, Russia. Then the yellow one is Hezbollah, which is the Shia force in Lebanon. Assad in the middle. Syria's flag. And then China. We haven't heard much about China at all, or read much about China's involvement. So that's it. That's it, Simon.
Yeah, I'm just about to stop that. Thanks, Peter. What an outstanding overview of that part of the world. Gosh, you're inveterate travellers, aren't you? And you do so much alone. It's just wonderful. I'll call on Jeff Bransbury to give a little thank you to you for that presentation, Peter. Jeff?
Thank you very much, Peter. As Simon said, that was a most interesting and well-prepared talk, and very, very thought-provoking. I've really got to read more about it. I mean, you've stimulated some thoughts there. Simon, you should invite Peter along to the travel group. I think he might. We might all buy some backpacks and go backpacking. What a complex area it is. It's so confused. Peter, you mentioned your feelings about the people in Iran and Syria and the Arabs, about how absolutely incredibly friendly they are, and that was my experience too. And it just shows how our preconceptions are so often wrong, aren't they? And I wonder why that is. Also, you mentioned there's terrible, sad the destruction of all the ruins in Syria, and you mentioned that perhaps it's not as bad overall in the country, and I hope that's the case. I've always wanted to go to Syria. I've never been there, and I do hope perhaps we'll be able to go there and see it for ourselves. So thank you again. It was the most interesting talk, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Peter. I've just unmuted everybody if we'd like to just show our appreciation of Peter's talk. Thank you very much.